Assalamu alaikum, good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for being here with us. I'm Imran Niazi, and it is my great honor to welcome you all to this exclusive session on impact of COVID-19 on progress towards sustainable development goals in South Asia, challenges and way forward for regional cooperation. This session, it is held in collaboration with UNESCAP South and Southwest Office. We are really happy to host this session. On behalf of Team SDPI and UNESCAP, we welcome all of our esteemed panelists and our participants who are here and who have joined us. This is a dedicated session. It's a 2-hour session to discuss the recovery from COVID-19 and our efforts to achieve the 2030 agenda. Today, we will discuss the challenges posed by COVID-19 pandemic and which is obstructing the progress towards achieving our combined vision. So to lead the discussion and to give you further in-depth insights, we have an amazing set of panelists with us. And just to quickly go over, for chair, we'll be joined by Mr. Riaz Fatyana. He's M&A and Convener, Parliamentary Taskforce on SDGs. Opening remarks will be given by Mr. Adnan Aliani, Director, UNESCAP. Again, opening remarks will be given also by Dr. Abid Suleri, ED SDPI. The moderator of the discussion would be Dr. Rajan himself. And to quickly go over speakers, we are happy to have Dr. Lutfi Rahimi, Head of Research, Biruni Institute of Afghanistan, Dr. Fahmida Khatun, ED, Center of Policy Dialogue Bangladesh, Mr. Wangchuk Namgay, CPC Development Cooperation Division, Bhutan, Dr. Nagesh Kumar, Director ISID, Dr. Sabyasachi Saha, Associate Professor RIS India, Ms. Atfa Ibrahim, Managing Partner, Epic Consulting Maldives, Dr. Poshash Pandey, Chairman, Toti Nepal, and Dr. Dushni Virakun, ED IPS Sri Lanka. So to start the session, may I request Mr. Adnan Aliani first for his welcome remarks. And if you allow me to quickly go over his very brief profile like that I have taken out. He's Director Strategy and Program Management Division and Officer in Charge Sub-Regional Office for South and Southwest Asia at UNESCAP. He has served as Secretary of the Commission at ESCAP from 2012 to 2014. So with this, requesting Mr. Adnan Aliani for his welcome remarks, please.
Thank you very much, Imrana. Mr. Riaz Fatyana, member of the National Assembly and convener Parliamentary Task Force on SDGs, Government of Pakistan. Dr. Abid Suleri, Executive Director of SDPI, Pakistan. Distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen. A very good afternoon and a warm welcome to ESCAP's panel discussion on the impact of COVID-19 on progress towards Sustainable Development Goals in Asia, challenges and way forward for regional cooperation. We are indeed happy to organize this panel at the Sustainable Development Conference organized by SDPI. I am told that ESCAP has made it a tradition to organize a panel discussion annually at this conference. And in that context, first and foremost, let me express my thanks to SDPI and Dr. Suleri for collaborating with us in organizing this panel discussion. South Asia is critical in the global attainment of SDGs. With 1/3 of the world's poor and food deprived and burdened with substantial gaps in almost all socioeconomic indicators, the sub-region's progress is a key determinant of the global achievement of SDGs. South Asia continues to lag in all 17 goals. Though good progress has been made on some goals, the pace of progress, however, is quite slow. Goals with the fastest progress are Goal 15, Life on Land, Goal 1, No Poverty, and Goal 3, Good Health and Well-being. In contrast, the sub-region is regressing on Goal 13 on climate action, Goal 11 on sustainable cities and communities, and Goal 12 on responsible consumption and production. Coupled with the unprecedented socioeconomic impacts of COVID-19, urgent strategic and concerted efforts are needed to accelerate the progress for achieving the 2030 agenda in the sub-region. ESCAP released our report on achieving SDGs in South Asia on 15th November 2021 at the 5th South Asia Forum on SDGs. The report highlights significant overlaps between the immediate measures required for a resilient recovery from the pandemic and the long-standing policy frameworks needed to achieve SDGs, and emphasized the need to use recovery from COVID-19 to accelerate achievement of the SDGs. The report prescribes a 5-point action agenda for South Asia, which, if implemented, will have cumulative impacts and can double South Asia's GDP by 2030. These measures include sustaining growth through economic diversification, raising investments in the core social sectors of health and education, expanding social protection, closing gender gaps, and improving basic infrastructure for addressing inequalities, ensuring food security, sustainable agriculture, and rural development, and investing in clean energy and environmental sustainability. During the policy dialogue, which was held on the 17th of November, discussions focused on improving connectivity in South Asia, particularly in transport, trade, energy, including green energy. Participants stated that regional cooperation was also needed to bolster education and R&D capacity, including amongst universities and research institutes. In today's panel discussion, we hope to hear your perspectives on the implications of COVID-19 for achieving the SDGs and your insights on the effectiveness of COVID-19 national strategies in this context. We also wish to benefit from your views on the potential for regional cooperation and the ways in which existing regional and sub-regional instruments and frameworks can be used for complementing national efforts in COVID-19 recovery and SDG implementation. In addition, we would like to hear your thoughts on the role that multilateral institutions like ESCAP or networks such as the South Asia Network on SDGs can play in this regard. I hope your discussions will be fruitful and outcome-oriented. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Adnan. May I now request Dr. Abid Suleri, Executive Director, SDPI, for his welcome remarks. Before I request him, allow me to say his short profile. Currently, he's member of Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council. He is member of National Advisory Committee of Planning Commission of Pakistan and of Trade Policy Advisory Committee, Government of Pakistan. And very lately, he has also been nominated as convener of PM's Coordination Committee of Agriculture Transformation. Requesting Dr. Abid Suleri for his welcome remarks now.
So you know that if Pakistan's anything is going wrong, that's because of me, because I'm present in almost all the advisory committees and perhaps not giving right advice. Well, thank you, Imrana, for this introduction. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to retain this tradition of convening this family get-together. And family get-together is family of practitioners and family of policymakers who are working on sustainable development goals very diligently and who have spent their lives on addressing some of the problems facing this region. So I'm thankful to UNESCAP and Adnan Saab, Rajan for joining hands again. But this year is slightly different because this year is also, we are introducing this network of organization called the SANS, South Asia Network on Sustainable Development Goals. So the family is expanding. So not only the most important and the old think tanks from South Asia, but also the youngsters who are doing extremely good work, and some of the prestigious think tanks that perhaps were not included as exclusively in this family of practitioners. So we are also now engaging with them and inviting them. And I think that fresh thinking and that would be a fresh breather for us. Now, ladies and gentlemen, when we are talking of leaving no one behind, beyond pandemics, leaving no one behind, we are actually talking of something which this region direly needs. And this region is basically, if I look at Pakistan, I can tell you that on one hand, we can see growth. Last year, despite pandemic, Pakistan grew by 3.94, which is revised figures would be 4+, the GDP growth. This year again, one is expecting that the growth would be high. So far, all the sectors, agriculture, livestock, manufacturing, services, the numbers are good. But on the other hand, there is inflation as well. And that somehow reminds us of inequality and inequity that perhaps is now increasing in our societies. And it's not only the case of Pakistan. If you look at other countries as well, so you will find the shining countries, and then you will find that some of them, they are not shining, and some parts perhaps they need a lot of extra efforts to illuminate them. And that's exactly what we want to discuss, leaving no one behind beyond pandemics. Personally, for me, it is a great occasion. It's a great learning. For think tanks, access matters. Many of the think tanks, their foremost requirement is that they need access to the policymakers where they can influence. For SDPI, we feel that we have more than enough access. Now the quality of advice matters, and that quality of advice can only come by learning what is working, what's not working in other part of our region, trying to understand the success stories and some practices which didn't work well and why. So I will be, of course, very keenly listening to all of you, the gurus in sustainable development in your respective areas, so that I can shape my advice very well. But this is also a fact that the type of challenge that one is facing, and now with the Omicron, the new variant coming in, we are not sure that how many more variants would be there, and no single country, no single government, no single region can contain it, control it. And this is where perhaps we need to think of re-strategizing our work and try to find the minimalistic agenda where we as a region can work together. So I'm being very pragmatic. I know that there are certain areas and there are certain political positions on which our countries perhaps they don't like to work together, but we can maintain and retain our ideological and political differences, but we can identify some minimalistic agenda on which we should work together, we should collaborate and try to take this region and the people of this region along. Honorable Riaz Fatyana Sahab has also joined me, but before Imrana introduces him, I'll just like to conclude with one more comment, and that is about Afghanistan. I think when we say leaving no one behind, we should also keep in mind that from this region, we are perhaps leaving the people of Afghanistan behind. I'm not discussing on legitimacy or illegitimacy of Taliban rulers, None of the countries, including Pakistan, has recognized them. But I feel by punishing people of Afghanistan, but depriving them from humanitarian aid, we are throwing a baby with the bathwater. And that, I think, needs to be addressed on an immediate basis. If Afghanistan, where perhaps according to World Food Program, may see a near universal poverty if humanitarian assistance is not readily provided to it, 97% poverty. And that is something that we as sustainable development practitioners in this region, we should keep in mind, and we should try to come up with some tangible, pragmatic suggestions to our government how to engage with other development agency to support humanitarian assistance in Afghanistan without supporting Taliban government. I'll conclude it here. Over to you, Imrana. Thank you.
Thank you, Adnan, and thank you, Dr. Suleri, for your welcome remarks. And we are indeed very happy to have Mr. Riaz Fatyana here with us to chair this session. And before we request him for his remarks, very quickly, Mr. Riaz Fatyana, he is member National Assembly and convener Parliamentary Taskforce of SDGs, Government of National Assembly. He has furnished his services as Minister of Education, Finance and Information. Requesting Mr. Riaz Fatyana for his comments.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I welcome all participants, especially from UN organizations as well as from civil society. And we are here to discuss what's our effects of COVID-19 pandemic on achievements and progress of SDG Sustainable Development Goals in the region. Because I'm chairing the National Parliamentary Task Force on Sustainable Development Goal, and it's a group of 60 members of parliament across the country and parties, we are major responsible for oversight and monitoring of progress in the country. I think due to COVID-19 pandemic, directly this is our SDG agenda and progress is affected. First of all, our democracy, our democratic process, our parliament, everyone was locked down. Due to this, we lost at least 1 year, precious time of our life, our democratic process due to COVID-19. And the process of monitoring and oversight was reduced. Secondly, due to lockdown and slow growth of economy, we lost resources. And of course, to get targets to implement SDG agenda, they need resources. So each and every country is facing lack of resources. Thirdly, poverty ratio is enhanced now. So this directly affected goal 1 and 2, no poverty and end hunger. And this is very important that education sector is very affected in this due to lockdown. Now children are reluctant to go back to their schools and they are reluctant to appear in exams. Everybody is habitual now that to sit in home and without school and college is a good life. So this is another very important issue, that how we can bring back our students to their education institutions. So education sector is badly affected due to COVID-19. And unfortunately, after shocks are very important in COVID-19. So death rate is increased. Mostly people who came out, who become healthy now, but due to COVID, one or second organ of their body was affected and so many people went on death. So this is the issue, and South Asia especially, all parliaments should sit together and we can exchange our expertise, our experiences, our know-how, that how we can better implement this UN agenda, because this is not only UN agenda, but this is for our own sake, our own nations. we are committed that leaving no one behind should be in our own interest. So in this region, especially in South Asia, poverty and unemployment is a major menace. So at least 1/3 population of the country is living below the line of poverty. So they are, due to less immune system, poor immune system, they are easy target of COVID-19 pandemic. So this all reflects that this is the time that parliamentarians, all policy makers, stakeholders, governments, civil society should sit together. We should meet with each other more oftenly and can exchange our opinion, experience, and know-how. Anyhow, in last, I appreciate again all participants and would like to say that I also appreciate UNESCAP-SSWA that they should convene their next Sustainable Development Forum in Pakistan. I hope Pakistan will be a better host, and due to our strategic position, we can invite from all corners of different countries. So on behalf of Parliamentary Task Force on SDG, we are willing to be your partner and your host as well. Parliament of Pakistan offer maximum logistic support and our participation in the next forthcoming event of on this at Islamabad. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. With this, we now come to the moderated discussion, which will be led by Dr. Rajan Ratna himself. And before I request him to lead it, allow me to say one last profile that is at my end of that is of Dr. Rajan Sudesh Ratnas. He's Deputy Head of South and Southwest Office at UNESCAP, New Delhi, India. He has earlier worked in Trade, Investment and Innovation Division in Bangkok, and as a professor and head Center for WTO Studies, Indian Institute of Foreign Trade, New Delhi. Dr. Ratna is an Indian civil servant and has worked for 25 years in the government of India. So, Dr. Rajan, the esteemed panelists.
Thank you. Thank you, Imranaji. Thank you very much. Let me also join welcoming Riaz Fatyana sir for this gathering. We are honored. We have always been blessed by his presence here in some of our events. And I see many people, and I must thank Abid Bhai, Imranaji, and the entire team, which has been working for making this very successful. We have now a panel discussion, and we have all the eminent speakers from South Asia. The question has been circulated where we would want to benefit from your experiences. We will definitely go as per the country alphabet wise, but let me just reiterate 2 points in terms of the question for the benefit of other audience who are attending this now. Each panelist, I am asking you to deliberate upon 2 points. One is the national perspective, another is the regional or sub-regional perspective. In the national perspective, maybe it would be good for you to hit upon or touch the key impact of COVID-19 pandemic, covering economic, social, and environmental pillars, and the initiatives taken by various national governments, the national strategies which they have brought in, because this can also act as one of the knowledge platform, and that was one of the objectives of establishing SANS. There is also an issue relating to some of the policy recommendations, which are good policy recommendations, which not only have tackled COVID, but have also invigorated some of the social pillars or economic pillars, and therefore we would be happy to hear from you in national context. In the international, global, or regional context, I would draw upon your attention. Many of you would have read the UN Secretary General's report on our common agenda. And that is what he spelled out, how existing means or instruments for regional cooperation can provide a multilateral framework for complementing national efforts through the regional cooperation strategy for COVID-19 recovery and SDG implementation. And you all are aware that the HLP of 2022 and 2023 both have the theme of building back better. And the last question, I mean, in that multilateral context, I would like to benefit from you, many of us would like, because that's the takeaway which we want to do, is how you think multilateral institutions like UNESCAP or a South Asian network of SDGs, which sounds with all of you are partner, all of you have been a very strong pillar, can play in assisting the countries in building back better and accelerate the progress for us in achieving the SDGs. So here, let me first of all request Dr. Lutfi Rahimi. He is the head of a think tank of Afghanistan, Biruni Institute, with which we have worked for long, and SCAP has been in collaboration with many of the think tanks of South Asia, have built capacity for Biruni Institute, and now we are working towards building a think tank in Bhutan. So, Dr. Lutfi, you have 6 to 7 minutes. My buzzer will go in 6 minutes time, so maybe we have a floor now. Thank you.
Let me begin by thanking all the colleagues and speakers and SDPI for organizing and giving this platform for regional think tanks to discuss SDGs and the impact of COVID. I was hoping we would be under a different circumstances to talk about Afghanistan, but as always, the phrase is that Afghanistan is a special case. And interestingly, I happen to be the first panel, the first speaker in the panel. So with regards to a little bit of background in terms of what has been done, specifically with regards to SDGs, if I can sum it up. We have to put an inflection point in terms of the things that I talk about with regards to progress towards SDGs, and that is August of 2021. So since the Taliban takeover of the government, there is confusion, and these structures have disappeared, and we are still waiting to see what they would do or what would happen. So most of the things that I would say with regards to what has been achieved in SDGs relates to 2001 to 2021, August. And then I'll try to talk a little bit about the second shock as well. So procedurally speaking, in Afghanistan, there were significant achievements with regards to SDGs. For example, we translated SDGs agenda into policy programs. It was nationalized. The goals were nationalized, the indicators, the targets, there were units within the government, high-level technical executive committees, as well as some ministries were mandated to take on the agenda and incorporate the agenda within the national policies across the board. And then policy alignment analyses were taken as well. Most national level policies were compared to some extent against the SDGs framework in order to make sure there were compatibilities, and then the gap in where data was missing was also identified to some extent. So this was the initial steps in terms of assessing or identifying certain baselines and then finding out where the gaps were in order to highlight that. So procedurally, in the first phase of SDGs, if you like, Afghanistan had made significant progress. But of course, SDGs is a very comprehensive framework. You know, it takes basically account of all dimensions of life and economy within a country. So if I could just put in some figures. Income per capita more than doubled between 2001 to 2021. Life expectancy at birth extended over 9 years. For example, years of schooling increased from 6 to 10 years in that period of 2 decades. For example, number of students increased from 800,000 to over 8 million, and 3 million of them being girls who went to school, starting in 2001, which was 0. So there were significant achievements and progress taking place, but of course it wasn't perfect. There were challenges like all other economies or countries in South Asia, and those challenges were on the national level and as well as on specific policy level. And I think at Biruni Institute, in collaboration with ISCAP, we did a national review of SDGs in Afghanistan and published a couple of reviews on that as well. Then fast forward to 2020, COVID-19 happened, and that kind of derailed the progress towards achieving SDGs even further in a region that was already falling behind. I must also say that SDGs, or the targets within SDGs, is not, they are very ambitious. They are not something that is achievable very easily. So we have to bear that in mind when we talk about achieving SDGs. So in a region falling behind already, COVID-19 is a shock that kind of causes that derailment or extends it, basically pushes progress towards SDGs even further. And then specifically in the case of Afghanistan, I think it was early February 2020 when initial panic of COVID-19 started to happen, and then to date, confirmed cases of COVID stands at 150,000 confirmed cases. But surely those numbers are very contested, and I will try to be very cautious in using these numbers because the tests and the abilities and estimates are all problematic. It's also estimated that over 7,000 deaths happened, and these figures are all by WHO. Over 4 million vaccines has been administered so far in Afghanistan. So the latest figures, I think, from September 2021. But the result of this COVID-19 initial panic and shock was that the economy plunged into a deep recession. Several different institutions, including big multilateral development organizations like IMF and the World Bank, but as well as our institute at Biruni, we estimated the contraction in the GDP during that period, or as a result of that shock. It was estimated something around -6 to -8% negative growth. But these temporary supply disruptions kind of subsided.
You've got 2 more minutes, Lutfi.
So that's shock number 1. Do we have more time later on to add, or this is the only time? Okay.
No, you still have time. You still have 2 minutes time.
Good. So a good example of regional cooperation in that period when COVID-19 was happening was that the borders between Pakistan and Afghanistan, Turkmenistan and Afghanistan, and Uzbekistan and Afghanistan was reopened very, very quickly, and that avoided a lot of issues, with regards to inflation, with regards to supply chain disruptions to disappear. So that was a very good example of regional cooperation. But 2 arguments were made in general, and I'm going to end with that, and then I can get to the rest of the things that I wanted to say maybe later. That maybe COVID-19 impacted the already poverty-struck people in Afghanistan less than the rest of the countries in South Asia. And this was an economic argument based on the idea that poor households already have these resilience mechanisms. When you have no income, a shock doesn't really mean that much. You're both mentally and physically kind of ready to kind of deal with another shock. But then there was this other argument that when you have no assets and you're a daily laborer, and then there are a lot of supply disruptions and you lose your daily income, that means you lose your bread. And then the longer impact of that kind of shock is much more lasting. So both arguments have their merits. So COVID-19 probably affected households in both ways. Maybe affected some of them less, but then affected depending on geographical locations. So that was the initial shock, and then it kind of subsided. You know, the restrictions weren't enforced that much, and then the government response was that they restructured the budget, the development budget. I think less than or around 3% of development budget, and then was refocused on combating COVID-19 issues. And then the World Bank had this emergency package of $500 million that was put forward to deal or fund, to put up new labs, put up new hospitals and extra beds in order to deal with COVID-19 disruptions. So that was the initial shock, and then the economy kind of was recovering, but that wasn't the only challenge, as Afghanistan being a special case, being very limited in its fiscal space and in its ability, and being very aid dependent, didn't have the luxury to kind of spend additional budget. While the conflict was ongoing, while there was a lot of political uncertainty with regards to Americans leaving and so on and so forth, all of that until August 2021. And then we have that inflection point where Taliban takes over the government and the previous government collapses. And then this has caused further and further. So this is the second shock that has caused poverty, like Mr. Suleri said, it's near absolute universal poverty. Over 90 to 97% of poverty rates have been estimated by UNDP. GDP has been estimated to contract by 13 to 15% if things continue as they are at the moment. And inflation has been very, very problematic. So cost of living and the cost of a basket of essential goods that people live in has increased. This has had a lot of implications. Maybe I will get to them later, and I'll end here since my time is over.
Thank you, Lutfi. Indeed grateful. I'm sorry, but we have all the good panelists, and maybe when the time comes, we can have a second round. Now, before I go to the next speaker, may I take this opportunity also to thank Mr. Riaz Fatyana sir, and also his suggestion and offer, which we would definitely like to grab and we accept. And I already had a bilateral chat with Dr. Suleri, so we would definitely get in touch with Dr. Suleri and work it on, and I think that would be one of the good things which we can do it. Also, yes, many of you would have known next year the South Asia Forum for SDG we'll be hosting in Pakistan, so we will be also looking forward to that engagement, support from all. I think definitely a prior support is granted by Abid. He's always generous, so we look forward to it. So thank you very much for that kindness and offer. Let me now go to Dr. Fahmida Khatun. She's an executive director, Center for Policy Dialogue in Bangladesh. She she's a well-known economist, researcher, and has been doing a lot of work for not only Bangladesh, but she has also done a lot of work for UNESCAP. Welcome again, and Fahmida ji, you have the floor now, and I will remind you after 6-7 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Rajan. And I would also like to thank SDPI and UNESCAP for this session. And congratulations to SDPI once again for organizing this annual event. So the questions you have posed, there are 5 questions and we have 6 to 7 minutes. It's very difficult, but I would just touch upon a few issues, maybe some a bit more, some a bit less, because we have been talking about the issue for the last 2 years or so since the COVID-19 had touched upon our life. So regarding the first question, that is the impact of COVID-19 on economic, social, and environmental aspects of SDGs, as has been mentioned by the previous speakers. The very nature of COVID-19 pandemic had been that it had restricted our lives and our economic activities. There have been shocks, supply shocks, and also there have been demand shocks. So because of the spread of the virus, governments across the world, including the South Asian countries, they had to go for lockdowns, which meant that economic activities had to be closed down, shut down. The workers, particularly the informal sector workers, they lost their income and employment, and also the businesses, and particularly the small businesses have been affected. And this had also, as I've mentioned, that supply constrained both domestically and also internationally. So it had an impact on the production system itself, and also the supply chain, that is, goods coming from various parts of the country to the markets. Then the other aspect is the demand side aspect, which is also the result of reduced income and employment. So people had less income, less money to spend, so that it had really had an impact on the poverty situation. So several studies have been conducted during the last 2 years, and the basic and the fundamental findings of all the studies is that poverty has increased. The number of poor, particularly those who were just above the poverty line, they have fallen below. And various studies in Bangladesh have shown that the new poor, the number of new poor ranges from 1.5 to 2.5 crores. So there are, of course, disagreement, but there is no disagreement about the creation of new poor. And this related to this is also the issue of inequality, because even before COVID-19, despite having such a spectacular growth in the country, which was about nearly 8%, above 8%, the economy was not being able to generate adequate employment, and also not enough for everyone. So inequality was quite high, the Gini coefficient, even the Palmer ratio, all these were quite indicative of the high inequality. So in case of economic SDGs, I would say that many of the achievements have really been, even if it is not reversed, but it has been affected, and it will take many more years to come back to the previous situation. The second aspect is the social impact, which is related to the SDGs 3, health, and SDG 4, education, and also SDG 5, women's empowerment. These are the most important social SDGs, social dimension of SDGs. So health has always been a neglected area, and even before COVID, the health services were not adequate to address the requirement of the people, and in fact, out-of-pocket expenditure is quite high. In fact, in Bangladesh, it is highest among South Asian. In South Asian countries, all the countries, out-of-pocket expenditure is quite high, which shows that the public health services are not adequate. So COVID-19 has pointed out that how inadequate and how poor the health services. So that also pointed out the need for a robust health services when we are talking about bouncing back or building back better. The second social aspect is the education. As we know that during this COVID-19 period, the whole period during lockdown, and also when the economy has started to open, many educational institutes are still closed, they are yet to open up. And during the COVID period, though some of the educational institutes could provide online education services, most were not, because in Bangladesh there are 40 million students which were out of school during the COVID period. And in a survey by the Bangladesh Bureau of Statistics in 2019, that shows that only 5.6% of the households in Bangladesh has a computer. Which means that more than 37 million students would not have access to online education opportunities during the pandemic. So, which is again the the fear or the apprehension of inequality is quite high, because education is a great equalizer also. The other aspect, this is related to this one, it emanates from SDG 4, that because the schools were closed, the poor families, in the rural areas, particularly even in the urban areas, in the poor families, while the boys were sent out for looking for livelihoods, looking for income, the girls were married off. The poor families felt that it is a burden, and also, not only economically, but also socially. Keeping a girl just sitting idle at home, it is not also quite safe. And economically also, they don't want to take the burden to feed another mouth. So the rise of girl child's marriage, wedding had increased, which has a significant impact on not only on the gender parity in education at the primary level, and also at the higher secondary level, but also the maternal health and also the child mortality, because Bangladesh had done quite well during MDGs and also during SDGs. In fact, just a couple of months, I think a month or 2 months back, Bangladesh was lauded once again for achieving many of the SDGs. And this is quite worrying, because the maternal mortality and child mortality are apprehended to increase because of this. So these are social and economic ones. In case of environmental dimension or climate change related dimension of the SDGs, because of COVID-19, of course, because of lower economic activities or shrinking economic activities across the world, there was a reduction in anthropogenic or greenhouse gas, but it was not enough to meet the global temperature, because the target was to reduce by 7.6% to reach or to limit the global temperature by global temperature within 1.5 degrees. According to to meet the Paris Agreement. But during COVID, there was this estimation that in 2020, the reduction was only 6%. So even if we reduce economic activity, there is still a danger of global warming and also high greenhouse gas emission, which means that the impact of climate change is still prevalent. And Bangladesh is at the receiving end of the impact of climate change. And it is committed, though it is a least developed country and it doesn't have to commit for contribution, but it has done the NDCs, nationally determined contributions, voluntarily, and it has identified 5 sectors: industry, transport, energy, land, and waste management. So it is well well within the target. But again, I mean, because the size of the economy is still low, it is still not a very high energy consuming country. But having said that, as we aim for faster economic growth, we have target to be an upper middle income country. We're graduating from LDC by 2026. So the emission level for carbon reduction has to be also higher. And the government has some commitments. And I must also say that as Bangladesh is
you got 2 more minutes, Fahmida ji.
Okay, yeah. So I will quickly move away from this and touch upon the other issues. Then the other issues you have
Maybe
mentioned
you can
about
touch upon
how
the
to build back better. I will. Sorry.
On the regional cooperation part?
Yes, yeah, okay. Let me just touch upon the regional cooperation. Definitely, because I think, during crisis, the need for regional cooperation is felt much more than ever before. And we have seen that, I mean, in the regional cooperation is not so encouraging, but we have seen that during the advent of the COVID-19, the countries in the region had come forward and contributed to a COVID fund, emergency COVID fund, and many countries have contributed to that fund, which is a welcome move, I would say. But apart from that token fund, we haven't seen much progress as yet, and there is a lot to do. That is a different kind of discussion, because if we have discussed many more times that the regional integration is so low in South Asian countries, regional trade participation is so low compared to the other regional regional platforms, and not only in case of trade but also in case of connectivity, education, health care services. Collaboration is so important. And in fact, the UNESCAP has conducted a survey where it found that 81% of the respondents, they have the survey, they responded that regional cooperation is the potential is very high in terms of dealing with the pandemic in the South Asian countries. But in going forward, I see 6 areas where the regional cooperation can be very useful, and it's needed because some of the issues are cross-country, because no single country can address those problems. The first one is that investing in education and also expanding social protection and putting women's rights first. This is a very important social dimension of SDGs. The other one is enhancing to provide universal health care, providing public health emergency. I spoke about the robustness of the healthcare services, the need for a robust and accessible health services. The third area is, of course, the energy decarbonization for a climate neutral economy. So regionally we can work together. The fourth area is, of course, the strengthening of the resilience of agricultural supply chain, which is very important for nutritional requirement of the people, and also increasing the access to water, sanitation, and also reducing the negative impact of biodiversity and ecosystem. And the fifth issue, which is important for the region, is that adequate housing to vulnerable people, and also the inequality. So it is a global diamond feature, actually, global characteristics, and also South Asian characteristics. And also finally, the importance of adapting and accepting to the fourth industrial revolution, because it is already impacting on our day-to-day life. But in order to benefit from the technological innovation and from the fourth industrial revolution, access to technology and capacity building is so important. So I think these are the areas where the regional cooperation can be very effective. And the last, in 30 seconds, the role of SANS, so South Asia think tanks, is also crucial, because in order to provide intellectual support and also bring out evidences so that policymakers can take action, SANS can be a very important platform. It can work parallelly at the you can say in the tier 2 level or track 2 level, and it can feed into the activities or actions to be taken by the policymakers of the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fahmida ji. Thank you very much for identification of these core areas for cooperation, the role for SANS, which it can do. Absolutely true. Many of these areas require a regional solution to build the national way out and building back better. The next speaker is from Bhutan, Mr. Wangchuk Namgay. Mr. Namgay, welcome. Good evening. Thanks for your time. He is the Chief Program Coordinator, Development Cooperation Division of the Gross National Happiness Commission in Bhutan, and he is the head and the Chief of Development Cooperation, and he has a lot of experience of working on a multilateral front. So, Mr. Namgay, your time is starting now. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajan, for the invitation, and again, thank you, NDPI and ESCAPE, for organizing this virtual meeting for the South Asian countries to share the experiences on the impacts of COVID and the measures that each country had taken. So, in the interest of time, let me directly jump into the outline of my presentation. So I would firstly focus on the impacts of the COVID-19 on the Bhutanese economy, followed by measures that we have taken so far. And after that, again, as per the question that has been shared, I'll also present on the impacts of the COVID on SDG goal realization here in Bhutan, followed by regional cooperation and international perspective as well. Now, basically, in terms of impact of the COVID-19, as elsewhere, Bhutan is impacted by the COVID-19. So the current GDP growth is negative 6%. And of course, the next financial year, we are expecting that it would rebound and we could have around 4.3 of GDP growth. And with regard to other macroeconomic indicators like employment, inflation, like anywhere, things are no better here in Bhutan as well. And mainly in terms of impact, the major sector that had been impacted by the COVID-19 was on tourism, construction, and the agriculture sector, mainly displacing large number of people from jobs and depriving their livelihood. Income of daily wage earners disrupted due to several lockdowns, and this has resulted into, again, similar to the earlier presentation in terms of even increasing Gini coefficient. Of course, there were so many impacts, but again, in the interest of time, let me limit to this only. Now, with regard to measures that the government had taken, again, quite a series of measures have been undertaken to overcome and to mitigate the impacts of COVID. And the first and foremost thing was the leadership from His Majesty the King was critical, and His Majesty the King played a critical role in terms of managing the COVID. So the first measure that we have had was His Majesty's Relief Fund, which is called as Drukyalpo Relief Fund, mainly providing relief fund to the displaced people who have no other means to bank upon in terms of their livelihood. This relief fund by His Majesty started since the start of COVID in April 2020, and we are still continuing with the His Majesty's relief fund. And the second is again fiscal and monetary measures here, mainly loan payment, deferring interest waiver. So these are some of the fiscal and monetary measures that we have taken. In addition to that, government also prepared economic contingency plan to the most impacted sectors like agriculture, tourism, and the construction sector. So here government invested around 4 billion so that there is rebouncing of these sectors leading to the improvement in economy. And the government also did front loading of 12 5-year plan, in the sense currently we are implementing 12 5-year plan. So that 12 5-year plan is programmed until 2023. Since this is the need of the hour, we had to request to some of the development partners to front load their financing, which they could have scheduled or programmed to give in 2023 to bring it forward and spend now so that economy is boosted. So development partners were generous enough to help us and agree to our proposal. Now let me go to the impact of the COVID here in Bhutan in terms of realization of SDG goals. So as I said earlier, SDG goals, of course, few were impacted, but most of the SDG goals are on track because of relief measures that we have had. And another interesting thing or a special thing that we have here is in terms of Bhutanese 5-year plan, fully integrated to SDG, which would mean that if we achieve the goals of the 5-year plan, we are contributing to the realization of SDG goal. So this has really helped us. So currently, as per some of the assessment done, almost all the SDG goals are on track, except on 4 goals. That is number 1, poverty, which is impacted because of the fact that people are displaced out of work. And the second one is quality of education. Again, because of lockdown, schools have to be closed. This was impacted, goal 4. And goal 8, again, decent work was affected because of the fact that lockdowns resulted in unemployment and people could not do the job that they were doing prior to the COVID. And finally, as I said earlier, Gini coefficient had increased a bit because of COVID. So besides these 4 goals, rest of the goals are on track. Now let me move over to regional cooperation. Now in terms of regional cooperation, again, as pointed out by previous speakers, we have had a series of regional cooperation in terms of having emergency fund set up and the countries from the region putting money to emergency fund. And again, we have had South Asian health ministers and senior health professionals remote meeting conducted, which were fruitful, and we have had a lot of lesson learning from there. Now, in addition to these regional cooperation that we have had, from our side, we would recommend some of the few regional cooperations here. First and foremost thing is, especially between India and Bhutan and even with Bangladesh, there is a facilitation of movement of essential items, food items, and even the vaccines and medical equipments. For instance, Bhutan is fully dependent, especially in terms of import with India. So mainly that the facilitation and movement of essential items are happening. So we would request to continue that spirit, and we would request to have that momentum going in terms of facilitation. So these are in fact very immediate ones that we'll have to have. And again, the COVID situation, maybe in near future too, is not really encouraging. So maybe we'll have to have this facilitation of movement of essential items. We'll have to keep going. And even in terms of access to COVID-19 vaccines, I think within the region, India is leading in terms of vaccines. So the region, through the regional cooperation, may have to bank on India in terms of having easy and affordable access to vaccines. So these are around 2 immediate regional cooperation that we could have. And in terms of medium term and in terms of long-term regional cooperation, what we are suggesting is maybe through the support of ESCAPE, I think within the region, we'll have to have future preparedness and risk reduction plan prepared so that we are more prepared than this COVID time. So this COVID was a bit challenging because of the fact that we were not that prepared. So here, after learning lessons from the COVID, I think we'll have to prepare ourselves. Countries will have to prepare on our own, and at the same time, we as a region will have to prepare so that later, should there be any other pandemic like COVID, we are ready and risks are mitigated. And another important regional
you got 2 minutes, Mr. Namgay.
Okay. So another regional cooperation that we could have is on region recovery plan. So in terms of recovery plan, of course, right now, because of relief fund and because of so many other support coming from multilateral and financial institutions, we do not really feel the pressure of recovery. But once these relief measures are lifted up, once multilateral financings do not have financing coming in, then we may have difficulties. So we may have to prepare here as well. So finally, on the international part, as I said earlier, multilateral financial institutions like World Bank and ADB did play a critical role, especially in the case of Bhutan, in helping to fight COVID through concessional loan and through grant. We would request these agencies as part of corporate social responsibility to keep this momentum going and help the countries in the region. So with this, thank you once again for the opportunity that is given to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Namgay. Thank you very much for your perspective. Now let me call Dr. Nagesh Kumar. He was the director of the UNESCAP. He was earlier DGRIS, and now he's the director of the Institute for Studies in Industrial Development, think tank in India. Dr. Nagesh.
Thank you, Rajan. Let me begin by congratulating our friend Abid and SDPI team for taking this SDC forum from strength to strength. I have seen it grow in stature and become one of the most important forums on sustainable development in all of Asia, certainly in South Asia. And I have been a privileged participant of many years. I don't recall how many, but I think at least 12, 13 years I have been regularly participating in it. And I have seen how it has become really a vibrant forum of discourse among the practitioners, among the academicians, among the think tanks and civil society to discuss really threadbare, the issues that impinge on sustainable development. So many congratulations, colleagues from SDPI, for making it what it is. And this panel, again, we have been, while I was at UNESCAP, I really thought it was a very fruitful place to hold this panel on South Asia. And I'm happy to see that it is continuing with Adnan and Rajan lending their support to this. So with that, let me just make 3 points. Abid, I was telling something about SDPI and the SDC. I don't know if you were connected. So, so I was congratulating you and your team for making what it has become one of the most vibrant forums on sustainable development in whole of Asia, certainly in South Asia, and I have seen it grow in stature over the years. Now, coming to the panel, I'll just make 3 points in the short time that we have to respond to some of the questions which were posed for us.
So first of all, like everybody and every country in the region, India was affected very badly. In fact, India saw a very serious contraction, first in the 40 years of 7.4% last year in 2021, and because of the lockdowns. And it was not that 7.4% across the board. Some sectors were really badly affected, including MSMEs, which are, as you know, backbones of every economy in South Asia, including India. So millions of workers were rendered jobless, poverty increased, and unemployment increased. Food security became a challenge, and number of SDG parameters, number of SDG targets and indicators suffered. So this is something which we all have witnessed, and so India, it was a very painful time to see the economy contract by 7.5% last year. However, because of the efforts made by the government to revive it, the stimulus policy, Atmanirbhar Bharat policy, and support line given to MSMEs, and then the lifeline kind of support, the free rations to 600 million people, given by the government, and the direct benefit transfers. And it helped that India had opened 400 million bank accounts under Jan Dhan scheme just before this COVID struck. So it helped that all of these people under poverty line were connected, with bank accounts. And so direct benefit transfers, so all of these measures did help. And so did the expeditious or accelerated progress towards vaccination. So we recently, crossed the 1 billion vaccines delivered in India. That and the stimulus measures, public support or public expenditure program, monetary policy support, all of them have helped to enable the economy to come out of the depths of the contraction it had gone into. So one is calling about a V-shaped recovery, but I think it is not a V-shaped recovery, it is a K-shaped recovery. So some sectors have done very well. They have recovered smartly. E-commerce in particular, digital trade in particular, they have made a killing out of this. And so, but there are many sectors which have not come out of it as yet, because life is not normal as we know as yet. So the tourism-dependent sectors, the transport-dependent sectors, hotels and restaurants-dependent sectors. So all of these people who worked in these sectors are still suffering. So it is a K-shaped recovery. It is yet to become a broad-based recovery. So there are estimates that this year India might see a kind of 9% kind of a growth, which is from a low base of 7.5 minus. It is barely 2% on top of what it was in 2019. So there is a big, very sizable output loss that is never going to be recovered. But yes, one can take some kind of comfort that Indian economy is recovering from the depth of the recession, and but it is still a K-shaped and not a V-shaped broad-based recovery. And my view is that the fiscal policy support that government started last year needs to continue until this recovery becomes self-sustainable and it becomes broad-based really. So it is premature withdrawal of this fiscal expansion would be not healthy, not good for India. And I think if I'm saying this for India, I'm saying this for all South Asian countries. All South Asian, countries' economies are in a very similar kind of a, state. So I think it's a very general point one can say, which holds good for any South Asian economy. The second point I want to make that because the size of budgets or public expenditure has been expanded, and it will have to remain like this for a while. There is no reason why it cannot be combined. These stimulus measures could not be combined with the SDG target and achievement kind of efforts. So, we need to strengthen our health system, which is also an SDG goal. We need to close the gaps in infrastructure, which is also SDG goals. And we need to find jobs for everyone who has been affected. This is also an SDG goal. Inequalities have risen because some vulnerable sectors got a bigger hit than others. And so inequalities have increased in a big manner. So social protection needs to be really expanded in a very big manner. And this is something which is part of SDG targets also. So I think this building back better recovery strategies are actually very close to the SDGs in South Asian context. There is hardly any difference. They are two sides of the same coin. And so more, human-centric, people-centric programs that we have, it would be helpful for SDGs. And this is a good time to close some of those gaps in social and physical infrastructure, which will be of lasting value for SDGs and also speeding up the recovery. So I think this is a great time that governments get together to achieve and focus on building, social and physical infrastructure and close the gaps in social and physical infrastructure, expand the coverage of social protection, which has been very low in South Asia, all countries included except perhaps Maldives and Sri Lanka. And India particularly, I think, and Fahmida spoke about Bangladesh. So it's the same ball game. So we need to expand the social protection coverage. And this is a very good opportunity thrown by this pandemic to do this. And that can, remain a lasting contribution of this phase of our history. Then the third point, and that is my final point, is about regional cooperation. I think other colleagues have talked about vaccine cooperation and health sector cooperation within South Asia and beyond. That certainly is very important and critical. It should be done. But there are many other issues for regional cooperation that pandemic has thrown before us. One is, of course, the use of digital technology. And there are different countries have innovated different ways of conducting life and business in these difficult times. When we were locked down, we were under lockdown, could not travel, you could not meet with friends, and you could not conduct your business normally. So people have found their ways of conducting business. And so there are many experiments and innovations which have sprung up all across the sub-region, which need to be sort of shared between themselves. So the cooperation in development experiences in handling these situations and digital experiences in particular could be extremely critical. The second thing is that reading, the writing on the wall. So this is the impact of pandemic and the incipient Industry 4.0 revolution, which is suggesting or indicating, early indications are that offshore production, which was offshored from developed countries to developing countries, like garment making, toy making, leather products, so all of these labor intensive industries, they're going to be reshored or onshore. They will be produced back in the developed countries in the coming years. So the world trade, the way it supported the expansion of countries like China in the 1990s and early part of this century, that era or that phase is not going to come back. So what I'm saying is, sorry, having some cough. So what I'm saying is that South-South trade, and in particular in South Asia, South Asian trade, we haven't had, we haven't had opportunities to exploit this potential. And in South Asia office of SCAP, we made number of times some calculations. Always we found no more than 1/3 of the total potential was ever exploited. So this is an opportunity which becomes even more critical in these times, in these coming times, that the world trade growth of 10% and above, which supported expansion and manufacturing led development in China and other East Asian countries, is not going to happen again. If at all, the writing on the wall is clear that many of that outsourced production of the past will go back to the home countries or the countries of origin. And so we may see a dip in our exports to them. So as such, world trade has been having very anemic growth since the onset of global financial crisis of 2008-9. And so in last 1 year, it has, very recent times, it has grown a little bit well, but this is because of pent up demand and not a sustainable kind of a demand. So I think the world trade will remain sluggish. And in that context, exploiting the potential or unexploited potential of South Asian trade remains a very important avenue for sustaining our growth in the coming years. So I think we need to mull and discuss, find ways to exploit this potential. How we can do that through harnessing the potential of transport connectivity, surface transport connectivity, as India and Bangladesh are doing, or other ways of bringing down barriers and improving facilitation at the borders. So there are many opportunities available to South Asian countries that has been debated for many years, and so those need to be exploited. And finally, I think this forums such as South Asia, this SDC, South Asia Economic Summits, and the South Asia SDG forums, and then South Asia Network on SDGs, SANS. All of these forums should be fully exploited for sharing the development experiences in this these times when we need each other more than ever before, and the official sort of process of regional cooperation are not very active. So I think these forums assume a greater centrality, in my view, in these times. And I hope with the efforts of all of you, they will be made very vibrant, and they will be facilitating South Asian exchange of ideas and exploiting the potential of South Asian cooperation in sustaining their sustainable development. So with that, I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nagesh. Thank you very much for being on time as usual, ever focused in interventions. Thank you very much for that. Let me now get to Dr. Sabyasachi Saha, Associate Professor at the Research and Information System Development, RIS, one think tank in India, and also a member of SANS. Dr. Saha, you have the floor now.
Thank you, Dr. Ratna, for moderating this session, and also for this very kind invitation to join this very distinguished panel. It is always very enlightening to hear senior colleagues and practitioners from South Asia on this very important theme. And in the last 1 year, as we have seen the pandemic affecting the countries in the region, we have also had the opportunities to engage among ourselves on what would be the way forward. And I see this dialogue as a continuation of this the brainstorming that we usually have on some of these critical themes, and RIS is very happy to join this panel today. I'm also very thankful to Dr. Suleri for extending the invitation to RIS to join this panel. But definitely after Dr. Nagesh Kumar sir has already spoken, there is very little for me to add on the Indian context that we see. At this point, Dr. Fahmida has also eloquently captured the social sector challenges and some of the common denominators that we see in the South Asian region. And definitely our record of progress on the SDGs, on the social sector, there were already apprehensions about SDGs missing the deadline. And the ensuing challenges. And as we know, the economic pillar of SDGs, the social sector pillar of SDGs, and the sustainability pillar of SDGs. But this pandemic, what it has done is perhaps brought us face to face with the core economic challenges that confront the SDGs. And we are looking back on the questions of quality of economic growth and resilience, which was by and large, very country specific. But when a global crisis of this nature strikes, when you see the social vulnerabilities coming up, you look at your level of inequalities that are there in the society. You try to reassess your poverty status. We have seen challenges like reverse migration, which brought us closer to the realities in terms of the vulnerabilities that exist, and also the challenges that are there with a very large informal sector of the economy contributing to whatever GDP growth that you have, despite having a very consistent record of income growth in the past 2 decades in the South Asian region. But at this point, we see very, very different experiences that countries in the region are going through. So one key element of it is, of course, the informal sector in these countries, the priorities in terms of creating decent jobs, and as Sir has already mentioned, about the enormous need for appropriate social security that we cannot neglect anymore. So SDGs 8, 9, and 10 that become very, very important as we also talk about the social sector, but this enabling framework that comes through these 3 SDGs become extremely important. And as part of these SDGs, we know that while we talk about quality of economic growth, there are specific targets that talk about financial inclusion, that talk about MSMEs, that talk about credit facilitation to MSMEs, that talk about bringing the convergence that is needed in terms of manufacturing value added with the countries that are ahead of us. So these are going to be critical for policy making going forward. So by and large, I won't go much into the challenges that are there. It's very well known. A little bit of what India could do in terms of responding to the pandemic. There were short-term measures that India took in terms of first and foremost about, as we these days call in terms of medical supplies, the vaccines, but I also bring in the context of domestic production of ventilators that could be achieved within a very short span, because there was a consortium approach, there was a public-private partnership, government played a facilitating role, and the critical demand and supply gaps in terms of medical devices that were readily needed in case of serious hospitalization, that was sort of, domestically arranged. So that gives us a lot of lesson in terms of responding to the pandemic, and also the supply of essential medicines globally. Of course, India had the capacity, but that was not enough. There was thorough, stock taking of what India can give to others, and on the basis of that, the program of supply of starting with hydroxychloroquine and other drugs happened. Once the vaccines were ready, there was an effort to share the vaccines with the developing countries bilaterally, also in the region, and also in support of the multilateral efforts that we see through the COVAX and the Gavi partnership. The regional partnership proved an important pillar in this. The SARC engagement started quite early, and it has been recorded and appreciated in some of the global commentaries, including that of the World Economic Forum. And when the second wave of the pandemic struck, we saw how again regional partnership became very important. As Dr. Kumar has already mentioned, India's emphasis on creating digital public goods and on digitalization was of enormous help when we developed the vaccine platform. It's a hugely real-time, sophisticated vaccine platform that goes by the name of CoWIN. And this has been a real digital public good that brought common man closer to the idea of how technologies can be taken closer for when in case of delivering social services. So that has emerged as a global example, and India is keen to share some of this knowledge with other countries. India has also tried to
you got 2 minutes more.
Yeah, sure. I didn't realize that, but I'll wrap up. See, and in terms of the multilateral processes that are on, what do we do at the WTO? As everyone is aware that India is pushing for this TRIPS waiver to enable countries in the South to have the manufacturing capabilities, because this is not the last pandemic, as anyone would agree. And the collaboration that is needed on getting the right kind of information and data in the region. As we have been mentioning, and RIS has been propagating this idea about having closer regional cooperation on SDG indicators and data and real-time monitoring. It should not be the case that we are always dependent on outside agencies for our own generating the data per se in the region. So we need to have robust statistical capacities, and there is a lot of scope for mutual learning in this direction. And that has been a consistent line of thinking from RIS, that we need a definite collaboration on data and indicators, and both G2G and as well as in the way we create knowledge through the think tank forums. Also, technology won't be a separate entity from development. So there is a lot of scope for collaborating on knowledge corridors, on emerging technologies, on carbon capture technologies, on genomics, on IoT and others. So we need to take development closer. And we know that we are not leaders in innovation, but at the same time, we have to have a framework where we can access innovation. So what kind of science diplomacy we need to pursue, what kind of South-South cooperation in the region that is needed to develop capacities on SDI would be of critical importance. And finally, how do we localize SDGs in the region? And there is a lot of scope for cross-learning, as has been emphasized time and again. There is scope for having new ideas like cross-border development districts. We have the Himalayan ecosystem that is common to several of the countries. We have the ocean economy that is common to several of the countries. And there, how the sustainability dimensions are emerging, how do we respond to the crisis, climate change and disaster preparedness. Several templates are already there, but what kind of new knowledge inputs are required to make these templates of regional cooperation robust, going beyond some of the well-known areas on trade and connectivity and trade facilitation that are already there, but to create inner strength and resilience within societies and people of the region, that would be important. So with this, I end my remark here. Rajan.
Thank you, Dr. Saha. We are actually running short of time. So let me now go to Ms. Atifa Ibrahim, Managing Partner, EBIC Consulting from Maldives. Atifa, you have the floor and your time starts now.
Let me also begin by thanking UNESCAP and SDPI by giving the opportunity to share the Maldives national perspective and contribute to as well as learn from other regional perspectives in this session on the SDGs, progress and challenges in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. Some of the key impacts of the pandemic for the Maldives on the economic dimensions of SDGs, undoubtedly the pandemic is the largest shock to have ever hit the Maldivian economy, and our real GDP declined severely by 32% last year. This is more than twice the impact estimated for the small island development states, which was estimated to have an average 13% decline. Of course, this decline had a very dramatic impact on poverty, and as per the World Bank estimates indicate that the poverty rate has actually increased from 2019 to 2.1% to last year 7.2%. Because of this macroeconomic impact, the Maldivian economy is very much dependent on the tourism sector. It's the large share of tourism in the economy. Tourism and related services directly contribute to 40% of our economy, 80% of exports, and almost half of our revenues. And flow-on effects of the impact on this tourism and related services were significant on the livelihoods of the people, and similar to the presentations of other colleagues, evidence from the Maldivian studies that were conducted indicated that the workers that were affected were very much directly from the tourism sector and also other self-employed categories and the informal sector. Looking into some of the social dimensions, there was also a significant impact of the pandemic on the income of foreign migrants, particularly the unskilled workers, with about almost 60,000 undocumented foreign migrant workers living in the country. Their vulnerabilities are substantially increased during the lockdown with no access to work or income, as a majority of these workers were infected with COVID-19 in the initial wave and isolated. Moreover, the work of the construction sector, where majority of these migrant workers earn income, halted their projects due to the lockdown restrictions that also prevented them from the opportunity of earning and further exacerbated their vulnerabilities. There was also a significant impact on the mental health of key vulnerable groups. I would like to highlight some of these: people with chronic illnesses, caregivers of children and persons with disabilities, including behavioral disabilities, people with substance use disorders, which heavily strained and already overloaded national mental health service. Although reported cases of domestic violence and other forms of abuse were low during the lockdown period from April to July last year, respondents from the surveys that we have conducted during this time highlighted that there were known cases of violence similar to pre-lockdown levels, and a number of reported cases of child abuse surfaced soon after this period, even in the Maldives, indicating that the long period of confinement at home has increased the risk of abuse and violence, which were also in line with reports coming out of other South Asian countries. It's also evident that the Maldives has made substantial progress in socio-economic development indicators, as well as many of the environment sustainability indicators, but many of these development gains are at risk of being reversed with the pandemic, as it has halted implementation of a number of development projects and lost traction on progress made in some areas. The national strategies and policies employed by the Maldives in tackling this crisis, I believe, were effective, and there's also considerable learning and other opportunities to utilize this evidence for aligning these policy responses with the 2030 agenda as well as the Paris Agreement. During the border closure and lockdown, government implemented various fiscal and financial measures such as moratorium on business and individual bank loans, working capital for SMEs, fishermen and self-employed workers, working capital for also large businesses, income support allowances for the unemployment, and also use of sparse land for agriculture. Various other additional cost-cutting measures were also implemented, such as salary cut downs for members of parliament and political appointees, as well as restructuring, salary restructuring initiatives for state-owned enterprises, suspending huge capital investments and public sector investment projects as well. So these policies were expected to reduce the impact on the progress towards SDGs goal 1 on no poverty, 0 hunger, and so many other SDGs such as 5, 8, 9, 10, and 11 as well. In addition to this, the government also gave traders and importers concessions in demurrage and warehouse fees, and there were flexible tax payment mechanisms. Maximum retail prices were also set for essential food products and fuel. Subsidies were provided for water and electricity bills. Continuation of social protection benefit schemes.
Asifa, you got 2 minutes more.
For other older persons with disabilities, and our already existing social protection programs were continued with the aim for further minimizing the negative impact on social related pillar SDG goals. I also wanted to highlight that there were policies on online teaching and learning that aim to reduce the impact on SDG goal 4 on quality education. And with the reopening of schools, we have initiated programs to support students with better water and sanitation facilities, as well as psychosocial support. Teleconsultations and digital modalities coupled with coverage of cost through our national healthcare financing scheme were relied on to reduce the impact on SDG goal 3. And with the availability of vaccines against COVID-19, Maldives has invested to purchase adequate doses of supplementing those provided by bilateral partners in the International Vaccine Facility. I would like to particularly highlight that the case of the Maldives was the vaccine rollout strategy was very inclusive, and we covered the foreign migrant workers that were living in the Maldives as well. In terms of very briefly looking into the partnerships and regional cooperation, responding to the pandemic beyond the health crisis meant that the government actually had to rely heavily on bilateral, regional, as well as multilateral partners. So some of the regional support during the pandemic include financial assistance for COVID-19 response and recovery efforts from Pakistan through Saha COVID-19 emergency fund. Also, we had currency swap agreements between the Maldives Monetary Authority and the Reserve Bank of India. In-kind and budgetary support from these partners have helped to cushion the sharp fall in state revenues. In terms of the lessons learned from the pandemic in the use of digital technology and online services, some of the regional initiatives like the Asia Pacific Information Superhighway Platform for Digital Connectivity is, I believe, a promising initiative that could contribute significantly to national as well as regional resiliency through digitizing and improving quality national statistics, e-resilience, and moving towards more e-government and reducing digital divide within the nations as well as between the countries of this region. Similarly, the framework agreement on facilitation of cross-border paperless trade in Asia and the Pacific provides opportunities for us to implement trade facilitation measures in an innovative way and rapidly transit into a knowledge-based economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Adifa. Thank you very much. Let me, without much ado, because we are actually really running short of time, and this is a webinar, and some of the speakers have to also go. So let me now call upon Dr. Chairman of Southern Nepal. He is a well-known personality in South Asia. First, I would only request you to adhere to the time. I will keep reminding. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rajan bhai. First, let me join other colleagues to thank UNESCAP and the SDPI for organizing this platform. And I also like to congratulate Dr. Abid for illustrious growth of SDPI and also for broadening the outreach of SDC. Rajan bhai, you have put 4 or 5 questions, and I think we need the whole day to discuss those issues. I think it's not possible to discuss in 5 to 7 minutes. Anyway, I'll touch upon a few of the issues you have raised over. First, let me start with the impact of COVID in Nepal. Well, as of yesterday, that is 7th December 2021, the total number of, infection of in Nepal was 823,102. That is around 3% of the population. And the total death toll was 11,545. So there the fatality rate was 1.4%. Recovery rate is 97.8%. And again, here, if you look at the vaccines, government provides vaccine free of cost. As of yesterday, 34.6% of the population were given first dose, and 28.9% of the population have received full dose. Here, as in other countries of the region, this COVID-19 has created humanitarian, health, and economic crisis in Nepal also. And Nepal's economic growth, and particularly last year, 2020, it was negative by 2.12%. That's the first time in last 2 decades. And this contraction in the economy is higher, severer than that of economic loss caused by devastating earthquake in 2014-15. Here our recovery, if you look at the projections made by international organization and also our government agency, it shows that our recovery is sluggish. It indicates that somewhere, there is the risk of L-shaped recovery in Nepal. And the impact is, and if you look at the population below poverty line, has increased by 1.2 million. That is, from 5.6 million pre-pandemic level to 6.8 million post-pandemic in 2020. That is, previously, pre-pandemic, 18.7% population below poverty line, but because of pandemic, 22% of the population become neo-poor. That's the one impact. And again, if you look at the revenue mobilization of the government, it has dropped by 7%. Government capital expenditure, it has decreased by 21%. And because of loss of revenue and government budget deficit, it has increased to more than 5% compared to less than 3% of pre-pandemic level. Similarly, with debt, government debt, public debt has increased, and it is expected that it will reach to 49.8% by 2020, by the fiscal year 2024, compared to less than 30% pre-pandemic level. These are the macroeconomic implications. Again, if you look at the micro level, only 4.1% of the firms were operational during the first phase of the COVID. And because of that, almost 1/4 of the labor force, they lost their job. Similarly, export, it is declined by 6.6%, and also import contracted by 18.1%. Tourist arrival, it declined by more than 80%, and foreign currency earnings from the tourism, it reduced by more than 70%. Well, we have seen some increase in remittance flow during pandemic, during first wave, maybe because of built-in counter-cyclical nature of the remittance, and also formalizations of this flow of remittance. But again, in 2021, we all experienced a drop in remittance. So all the, if you translate all this impact into SDG, then if we see, there is direct negative impact of COVID on poverty, that is SDG 1, on food security, SDG 2, on health, SDG 3, on economy and job, that's SDG 8, and disproportionate impact on women, that's SDG 5, and inequalities, that is SDG 10. We'll see, those negative impact on those, SDGs. Well, if you look at the, what government did, during that period, okay, government, brought out, announced, token relief package, together with the announcement of lockdown, and that helped to cushion the impact of the disease on the economy. Later, government responded through both, monetary policy and fiscal policy. Not a fiscal policy. There were the measure were been aimed at increasing access to testing for the COVID and also, treatment of the COVID, establishment of quarantine facilities, and also, waiver of customs duties on medical items. And second, that's basically related to the reduce the crisis of livelihood. And for this, government implemented food distribution program and also extended eligibility for the Prime Minister's employment program. And also provided some discount in utility bills. And the third, that is basically to support the firms. The government deferred taxes and is exempted some income taxes to micro enterprises and also provided concessional loan facility to severely affected sectors. And under monetary measure, the central bank provided liquidity support to the bank, as well as facilitate provisioning of credit to the private sector. Here major sorry. Okay.
2 more minutes.
And the 2 more minutes. Okay, it's not fair. Anyway, I'll try to conclude. That. Oh well, and in monetary part, that's the some restructuring and restructuring of the loans and refinancing facility of the concessions. Well, so if you calculate the cumulative impact of all these monetary and fiscal packages, that is about 5% of the GDP. Here again, I fully agree with Dr. Nagesh that these recovery packages should not be withdrawn abruptly. That monetary policy, it should remain expansionary, and we should continue. This fiscal fiscal package until GDP growth reaches its pre-pandemic level. So here, what kind of package we need, and what are the challenges? Basically, this COVID also, and this recovery package also provides the opportunity to address long-standing structural challenges. It should steer the economy on path of green, sustainable, resilient, and inclusive development. But the problem, for having that kind of package is, first is the resource constraint, and I think some of the speaker also highlighted this. Here we need to increase investment in knowledge, skill, technology, as well as green investment. But look at our situation. Our revenue has declined. There is increasing budget deficit and increasing public debt. So that is one challenge. Second, our over dependence on remittance. Not only for the household income, but also government revenue. It contributes around 50% of the government revenue that is dependent on import. Import based. On import. So that has remittance has fueled import, and that has fueled our revenue. So that is another. And another next challenge is the increased poverty. Now we have created, this COVID has created a new poor, and how we are going to address those new poor. And the most major issue is inequality, both horizontal as well as vertical, and also spatial. Like all economic activities are concentrated in Kathmandu or in other urban centers. So how we are going to address these are the major challenges. Well, if you allow me, maybe for one minute, then I'll just I'll just.
Okay, your time is over, but you get 1 minute. Dusni has allocated her 1 minute period.
How can this think tank and science can contribute in this implementation of the SDG? Okay, if you look at the SDG, then goal 16. For goal 16, think tank is, I would say, is the instrument for achieving goal 16. And as he talks about accountability and inclusive institutions. And if you, again, is the part of goal 17. As it talks about the importance of civil society. So I see there's a definite role of the think tank and that chance in implementations of SDG. First, how can we support this implementation? Then one could be by analyzing and assessing progress towards the goal. It makes accountable our government to our achievement of SDG. And the second way could be by acting as knowledge broker between sector as well as between the stakeholders and the government. That is another contribution. And the third, by engaging stakeholders and providing platform for pluralistic debate. That is another contributions of science and think tank. And the fourth could be, we can share knowledge in this platform, science, and we can have some sort of joint learning in the process. That way we can contribute in the implementations and achievement of the SDG. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you very much. Now let me go to Dr. Suleri. You have the floor. You don't need an introduction. But I will remind you.
I think I'll pass on the time for Dr. Dushni so that we can conclude in time.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So we'll come back to you after Dushni. So let me now call upon Dr. Dushni Virakun. She is Executive Director of the Institute of Policy Studies, Sri Lanka. Dushni, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Rajan, and thank you, Abid. I'm also going to help you keep time and keep my interventions fairly short. I think just listening to the panelists that came before, it's very clear that the experiences and challenges that we face individually is pretty much a collective story. And that most of our countries are seeing a reversal in the progress that we've made to address issues of poverty and inequality over the last decade. And that pandemic, the outcome as we start taking stock of the cost is that we are seeing large numbers being added to existing poverty numbers. I mean, Sri Lanka's case, for instance, the World Bank has estimated that we're going to see our poverty $3.20 rate go up from about 9 to 11%, and that's just pretty much an initial estimate without digging deeper into the numbers. So the problem, as I've listened to all the speakers, is that there have been disproportionate impacts through the pandemic. And now as we come into the recovery phase, what we are seeing in Sri Lanka, for instance, is that we are seeing rising inflation. Price pressures are really high, and it's coming mostly from the food sector. And there again, the poorer households are being impacted far more as their cost of living goes up. So to me, the two questions are, in this precarious sort of situation we find ourselves in, what is the exit strategies that we have individually as countries and even collectively as a region, whether we've thought through how we will wind down the support measures that have been there, and what that might mean for growth, for poverty reduction, as well as for achieving the SDG targets in the next 5 to 6 years. So taking Sri Lanka as an example, I think we are pretty much on a tightrope right now. We have a huge debt problem hanging over our heads. We've run out of foreign currency. Our reserves are very low. So there is a tightening of support measures that have been extended, which were pretty minimal even to begin with. And that means you're cutting down on health spending next year as compared to the amounts we've spent in 2021. We are cutting down on subsidies and other social expenditure measures, and these will all obviously have an impact on the poor rather than the rich. So in this context, the growth process that we are seeing, I mean, again, the inequities are very apparent. We are still not back to work full time, and there are signals that we will continue to work, have more flexible work arrangements. And again, it is the higher skill, the better off who are benefiting from that, as we have the skills and the resources to continue with remote work. So I think collectively, these are issues that are being faced by most of the countries of the South Asian region. There will be less donor assistance coming our way, and that brings me to the final point on what is the regional sort of modalities that can help us meet these challenges. And again, from a personal country experience, we found the South Asian regional partnerships have been beneficial in terms of Sri Lanka's access to bilateral swaps, credit lines for commodities that have been extended by some of the partner countries. But one area that I feel that as a region, we have really not spoken out is about issues of vaccine equity. And clearly, 2 jabs, we're not done with it. Sri Lanka has had 70% of its population has had 2 shots. But now we are seeing numbers of COVID infections rising again and looking now to get the 3rd booster jab, etc. So the vaccine equity and making vaccines available to the developing countries, I think is pretty much a global issue. But I think the UNESCAP, as well as the South Asian SDG Forum, etc., should be taking this up more strongly. I have not seen such sort of a common concerns being voiced in this part of the world, though I've participated in so many vaccine equity forums. It really has not been sort of voiced in our sort of more research circles. So in view of time constraints, Rajan, I'm handing back to you with the final word to congratulate Abid and the SDPI for putting their annual program together and bringing this think tanks into this SDG session.
I know there is a next session which will be started by the SDPI, so the time is very short. I'll just take and request all of you, all the speakers, to please open your camera. The host can take one screenshot for the video. So everybody can please switch on your camera on. Lutfi, if you are there, please. Hoshbhai, if you are there, please switch on your camera. We'll just take one shot, and then I give the floor to Abid Bhai because he didn't speak, and he has the right to speak as a co-host as well as one of the panel members and a pillar of SANS. But Imran Ji, you can take a picture. You can say 1, 2, 3 so that we all can smile.
Okay, on the 3 then. 1, 2, and 3.
Okay, so Abid Bhai, you have the floor.
Well, thank you, Rajan, Nagesh, and all the dear peers and colleagues from South Asia and beyond. As I said in the opening, it's always a pleasure learning from whatever peer think tanks they are doing in their respective countries, so that we can capture some of the success stories. But the common message that emerged from all of the discussions is, and I completely agree with Nagesh by his description of K-recovery, inequal recovery, which is leading to further inequalities. And if that is not addressed, the idea and dream of leaving no one behind, that would affect very badly. But the positive ray of hope within this is that most of the governments, including ours in South Asia, they have learned during COVID that ignoring social sector development is no more an option. So if we were caught without any preparation for pandemic, now for the other emerging challenges which are certain to haunt us if we don't bring our house in order, climate change and water scarcity and health and education and food insecurity and all others, and especially the erosion of social fabric that may happen if the inequalities in our countries, across the countries and within the countries, if they persist. So the governments, they are focusing on social sector development. And this is where, as a think tank, our role becomes extremely important. We have to come up with the evidence-based policy recommendations and policy solutions to our government and to the regional bodies, condoning and helping, supporting them where they are doing right, and pinpointing them with solutions where we feel that they are not working as they should have been. And this perhaps we can do much better if we join our hands and if we do it collectively. And during 2021, we work together. I look forward to keep on this shared spirit of working together in year 2022 and beyond as well. Thank you, Adnan and Rajan Bhai, for organizing this session with the STC.